Today, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, so somebody asked me, they have the unique situation where one of the parents is going on Medicare and the dependent was still on regular insurance and how to handle that. And that kind of opens up really more about dependents, some of the weirdness with dependents. So if somebody's parent is going on Medicare, it's gonna, if you know somebody's going on Medicare before you set any application up, now whether this is with spouses or whether this is with a child, always list with spouses, you list whoever's going on Medicare second. So you're putting that Medicare person listed second. If you know if it's just typical, it's a 64-year-old and a 63-year-old, all right, put the 63-year-old on first. But if it's somebody who's disabled and they say, oh yeah, someone's on disability and they're going to go on Medicare in 2 years, even if they're younger, you would list them second. So always, in general, if it's a couple, you put the Medicare person second on the application. But if it's in the point of a dependent, the Medicare person is going to be listed first, especially if it's a single person, maybe mom or dad's going on Medicare in a year and the child's still in college, or they were a really late bloomer and they have a kid in high school, or they've adopted their grandkids. We've seen that, where their grandkids are now part of their family. They're a dependent. You have to list them first. You can't list the dependent first and add mom and dad as second. You have to list the mom and dad, the primary people first. So then you would just list them as not getting coverage. It's the same way you would do it if somebody has employer coverage at work that's affordable for them, but their kids are super expensive on them and their work. So you just put their name on there and don't click the button saying they need coverage. Now, if you want me to pull up My Health Sherpa and show you what I'm talking about, you let me know, but it's pretty easy. It just says click who's wanting coverage and unclick who doesn't want coverage. You're still including all of their income. It's always about taxable household income. If they are going to a different state, now this is you live in Texas and your child's going to go to New York for college. The question is, do you want insurance in New York or do you want insurance in Texas? You can't go on the marketplace with one application and get coverage in both states. The system's not there yet. I think it will eventually. Whenever they do a massive rehaul of healthcare.gov, it's going to happen eventually. But the state thing, you can't have multiple, you can't have something in one state and also in another state on one application. Now, if you happen to have a carrier like Oscar who works in 2 states, great. You sign them up in Florida and they cover you in Tennessee. Okay, but you're still not listing anything about Tennessee in that application. So when you have a parent who one state and their child's going to college in a different state, there's a couple different questions you have to ask. One, are they coming home in the summer? Or are they the kid that, they moved to Minneapolis and they're not coming home all summer? Well, then you really want them to have coverage in Minnesota. You don't want them to have coverage where they have to come home for every little thing. But if it's, oh no, they're just going there and they're coming back. All right, so that's your first question. Where are they going to be? Are they going to stay there for just college only, or are they going to stay there for college and the summer? And then, do they have pre-existing conditions, right? Is this something that's not pre-existing condition, but something that they're currently working with? Do they have a counselor that they have to work with? Well, if they're working with a counselor in their home state and it can be virtual, well, do I put you on the plan with me here, with mom and dad? And you know that when you're out of the state, it's only covering emergencies. Typically, that is fine. Most college kids don't end up with anything other than emergencies. So it can cover them as an emergency, and then they can still do their virtual counseling with their doctor that's in this home state. If they want something like, well, they want treatment there, well, they're not going to be able to get coverage with mom and dad and have coverage with their kid. So you can do it 2 different ways. You can ask them, do they need to be a tax dependent? Can you put them on at $15,000? Do you think mom and dad, you pay them $15,000 to stay there, and then have them write their own plan by themselves, gets them a CSR in that state that they're in. If you're contracted in the state, great, you write them. If you're not contracted in the state, find somebody. We've got lots of people who are, I think every state's covered. And get them a CSR, they're in at 15,000. If they are completely fine. I would say 90% of my college age and parents, they have said, no, it's fine. They're just going to college and there. Most colleges have a walk-in clinic, you know, something really simple. Common Ground, actually, one of our local carriers will cover 3 mental health visits outside of the state, you know, so some of the carriers have little things for those out-of-state students. Eventually, the system will be able to go click the button and then it'll pull you New York's options or something, but right now it's not. If they're in the same state, so you know, mom and dad live north of the state, kids are going to college in a different part of the state, they're in a different county. When you're filling out the application, remember, it gets to the point and it says, is everybody living at this address? So you put in the main address of mom and dad. And then later it'll say, is everybody living there? With the college kid, you say no. And then you put their college address in there. Again, same state. You put their college address in there. At the end of the application, it will actually say, all right, here's the whole family living at the main house is options. And then it'll say, here's the college kids options. And it will give them options in the county that they're in. So that way they're covered for emergencies. They're covered, you know, not out of network emergencies, they're covered. If they need to go to counseling, if they've got the flu, they don't have to come home to have surgery. So that's an option as well that you can do and talk with the parents and say, here they are. Now, if the kids are coming home from summer, you say, all right, do you want me to switch them back? They just moved from their college apartments or their dorm room back home. Do you want me to switch you at the summertime so you're all together? Or are they going right back? They can keep the coverage that they had when they were out of town because it covers them for emergencies when they're home for the 3 months of summer instead of switching them. Or, nah, you know, we want them under our side. You know, they're going to be here, mom, you know, they're local doctors here, whatever. So you can move them, you know, or they can just stay with that insurance that they had in college. So there's options, and you got to explain these options and kind of weigh the pros and cons of each one with the parents and let them decide. I try to get the college kids involved in this conversation, and that's about 50% of the time they might show up. Most of the time, mom and dad are making this decision. So whether they're on Medicare or whether they're on employer plan or whether they're on the marketplace themselves, these are kind of the options that you have. Does anyone have questions about that? No? Pretty
What do you
easy.
see as the pros and cons?
So in the same state, 2 different carriers, the con is now that you have different deductibles. You know, you're not having a family deductible, family max out of pocket. And then if you move them, you know, have they used it at the other one? So that's kind of the thing. Can be a con. It's not a big deal, you know, and then some parents are like, I just want one bill to pay and she'll be fine coming home to visit. She comes home every weekend. Okay, well then, yeah, if they're home all the time, they probably don't need somebody in the college town. But if they don't come home every weekend, you know, it's parents will go, oh, well, yeah, then she can get doctors there. So, or he, you know, so there's not really a lot of cons. It's just understanding the moving parts and that if they want to have them have college state, you know, college insurance at that county and then move them into mom and dad's plan in the summer, understanding that that deductible isn't going to move with. You know, there really isn't any cons as far as I'm concerned. What you get on taxes for having a child usually does not justify keeping them on your plan if they're in another state, when you can get them on their own plan with a low CSR. And most parents are like, oh, well, that's so much cheaper and it's better coverage anyways. So I don't really see any cons on that, but there's a few that are like, no, they're my tax dependent, I'm claiming them. Okay. We've also sold short-term. So in my state of Wisconsin, you can have a short-term policy for 364 days. Allstate, United Healthcare, and Pivot. Those are kind of our 3 main ones. Those are nationwide coverages as well. So that's your other option. They got a healthy kid, doesn't go to the doctor, but they don't necessarily want to come home if they break their leg and they need surgery. If you put them on a short-term plan, they're not on the marketplace at this point. You get them a short-term plan that covers them in other states. They can use that everywhere. So that's the other, and I did talk about short-term plans last year. If you look at the YouTube channel, I've got all the 2023 videos, by the way, into the new YouTube channel. There's a whole section that talks, I have a whole video about short-term plans. Now, if you're in a state that doesn't allow that, does the state the child is going to allow it? you know, so short terms have a place. Now, there's still legislation, we still don't know what's happening. And I saw Rowena, you said, can families make those switches themselves? I would not have them make those switches themselves. Rarely do they do that correctly. That's what you're supposed to be. You're the expert. So you tell them, when you're ready to make this switch, call me. When you're ready to do this, call me. It's not like they're just changing an address or something. To try and make sure they're switching is a little bit more difficult when it comes to that sort of stuff. You'll spend more time explaining how to do it than if you just do it with them and for them. So any other questions on that? I wish there was more carriers that were across state lines, but you know, there just isn't. It's just the nature of the beast right now. All right. So the other thing you can do, the other thing I wanted to bring up now is dependents that aren't tax dependents, but you're supposed to cover them. This is another one, divorce decrees, okay? Lawyers, judges, angry parents, they don't understand how the marketplace works, especially judges. I've got a couple lawyers that I'm like, have talked, that have become kind of networking and almost referral partners so that they can understand how this works. So you get divorced and, you know, you have one child is your tax dependent and the other child's the other parent's dependent, right? Maybe they're switching them on and off, and maybe the dad or maybe the mom, because she was the breadwinner, has to cover them, but they're not a tax dependent. There's a couple ways of doing this. One is you put them all together. They're all, now this is again, assuming all in the same state. You put them all together on the same plan, the person who has to carry them. But you do a quote beforehand. You take up your marketplace, and I'll bring up my Health Sherpa. Hello, so I'm gonna show you a little trick that I tried to teach in the class live, but it was a little bit messy. So this way it's a little bit cleaner. And then I'll go right back to the class. So I'm going to share my screen. The scenario is working with a person who has to take care of their child on the health insurance due to a court order or something in that situation, but they're not their taxable household dependent. So usually this is typically a male's, the father's, but not always. So one parent has to cover the child on their health insurance, but they are not a tax dependent. So the rules are you can't take a tax credit. So I'm just going to throw up an example of a family. My assumption is it's two parents, dad and stepmom. They have a child themselves, a 5-year-old, but the father has to cover a 13-year-old. They only make, we'll just say 55,000. When I'm running a quote, this is how I handle it. They're a taxable household family of 3, but he has to take that 4th person on. So I add it on there. Again, assume that you've done your due diligence. I already know what network they want, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go with those assumptions. The Medicaid system in our state is not expanded, so I'm just putting them all in the plan. So I tell this couple, all right, I'm going to show you some plan options. Do not look at the cost. And that will be clear in just a second. So I pull up the silver plans to see if that's better. You know, for ease of time, I'm going to say they want this one. Now, I've told them we've looked at these plan details. Again, don't look at the cost. $600 deductible, max out of pocket $3,140, primary care doctor, specialist, all that situations, they understand the plan. And then I say, okay, we're going to show you the cost of the plan, but because your 14-year-old is not one of your tax dependents, we have to adjust the cost. So assuming they live in the same state, assuming the child is in the same county or same area where the insurance covers the county they live in as well as where dad is. I find that exact same plan. So the cheapest silver plan would cost $262.51. So that's the full cost of that 14-year-old. So I will pull up a calculator and I'll say, okay, your 14-year-old son is going to cost $262.51. If we add that to this $44 plan and 31 cents, the cost for this insurance will be $306.82. Are you able to pay that? The plan itself will stay the same, but are you able to pay $306.82? And they may say, yep, I totally can. Great. You're going to run through this application, add the fourth child or the second child, the fourth family member, as if they actually live in the household, as if everything is fine. Don't enter the other spousal's person's information. It's just going to take you down a rabbit hole. If they live in a different part of the state and you have to split them, that's where you would say, does this person need to go? Do they live at this address? You would say no, and you would enter the other address where they live if they live in a different spot, because then at the end of this application, it will split. It will show you those options, but they still get to stay in the CSR. The reason I'm saying this is because often that parent who has to cover that child still has to pay for this. They still have to contribute to that max out of pocket $3,140 when the father only makes, or the parent only makes 55. You're protecting them the way the system is supposed to protect them. You run through the application, you get to the end, and it will say, hey, we're offering you $1,306. You unclick that, and in this situation, they would only take $1,000 so that they would pay $306 and then the 82 cents. At tax time, the IRS says, oh, you said you're a family of 4, you're a family of 3, you owe us $262.51. Oh, wait a minute, you paid $262.51. We're good. And the family is perfectly fine. They're not in trouble. You're making the system be the way it's supposed to, protect a family with lower income. You can also do this if it's not a CSR. It doesn't have to be a CSR, but I point out the CSRs because that is crucial to protecting people who have lower income. This father or mother that has to cover this child, they only make $55,000. It doesn't make sense. That's why it was created, for them to have a $9,000 max out of pocket. Now, same situation, I'm going to raise their income so that they're making 75. Okay, they're probably not in the CSR, right? They're not going to take that. So let's share that screen again, assuming now that the income is 75,000. So they don't even get the CSR in this situation. They're making too much, or they are, but it's not a very good CSR. They're making 75,000. So that silver plan now has a $7,550. That's not particularly great. This is when I would look in our state. Again, I know our system really well. The bronze plans with our carriers, we have a lot of bronze plans that have $0 deductibles. They're brilliant. They're our #1 sellers because, hey, if I can have $0 deductible and know what I'm going to pay when I go to the doctor, most people take this. So in this situation, we could say, all right, it's $233.70 plus, remember, the child is going to cost more. So we look at the plans, we tell them, ignore the rate up here, just ignore that. Which one of these two plans makes the most sense to you? Most of the time, they're going to take this one. So then I go, all right, here's the child. What's it going to cost him to be on the plan, just himself? No tax credit. So I find the exact same plan. It's going to be $230.83. So I add that on top of 7035. So the cost is $301.18 for them to take this bronze plan. Make sense? Find out the cost as if they really are a family of 4 on the taxable household income. Find out the cost, the gross cost of the child that has to be covered, but is not a tax dependent. Then when you enroll them in the plan, you add, or I should say, subtract from the tax credit being offered this amount. Hopefully that makes sense. As I mentioned in the live class, if you run into this situation and you need help, because maybe it won't even happen for 5 months from now, you can rewatch this video, but you can also reach out to me on Facebook Messenger. I'm not saying I can answer that moment, but I would be happy to help you walk you through this. Just tell that family you're going to look up what's best for them and go from there. I hope that makes sense.
And Chris, you mentioned that if they're out of state, who would you put as the lead parent? Because if they're out of state, you can't put your client in that state as the.
You can.
You can. Okay, just
You
use
can,
the
but
child's address.
You're just putting the parent there so that, because you have to have a parent. So you would put their name and you would put the other spouse's address. So it would go there. You just wouldn't put their current one. And then there's a spot that says, is the mailing different? Then you put the mailing address to their current address. So put the application goes under the address of the state of the parent who the child lives with. And then it says, is the mailing address the same? No. And then you put the mailing address to where the parent who's covering them actually lives. That's really the only way to get them that out of state coverage, if the parent who lives out of the state is covering them. Was there any, I didn't look at any of the chats. Is there anything I should look at, Sam, or you guys got it? Sam, Josh, John, Andrea. Well, that's all I had for, dependent stuff. And kind of if that parent is different, because somebody asked that, I got a person going on Medicare and they still have a child. All right, you still put it in as if they are being covered. You're just unclicking it. You're excited to watch this about 12 more times. All right, thanks, Holly. That's why I said you can watch this and kind of, I think there's a speed thing. You can kind of slow it down. Experiment. I mean, these are one of those things. Go ahead, experiment, see what it means, come up with those scenarios that you've had, that you've run into, and what would it do? What's it look like? What I just did with the child and the tax credit and stuff, I'm also going to kind of do with the CSR. So that's in 2 weeks. So review, next week, we're going to talk about the consent attestation forms and CMS and some of the stuff that's happened, best practices, things like that. I'll give you some technology that I use. March 14th, we're going to talk about the CSR plans, really understanding them and how to use them to the best of your client and protect them. Interpreting summary of benefits, that's coming up, and then the ICRA and QSERA compliance. So that's kind of the CSR, what I just did with some of that tax, I will also be doing again with the CSRs. So if there's no more questions, you guys can get 20 minutes back in your life. It's wonderful. Thank you all. Appreciate you popping in, and those who came late. I will be sending this recording out as soon as probably today, because this is a relatively short one.